meeting to order, please. My name is John McKay. I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and this is Rob Oliphant, and he is the chair of the Immigration Committee. It's an unusual meeting of two committees meeting together to hear what you have to say. Formally, I have to open on behalf of the Public Safety Committee, and my friend Rob Oliphant has to open formally on behalf of the Immigration Committee.
So we're now starting a second meeting. Bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome everybody.
71e réunion de la...
It's the 11th meeting of the Committee on Citizenship and Immigration.
To this special meeting. For the first hour of the meeting, Mr. McKay will be the chair, and then we'll turn it over to me. However, if there's anything that goes on in the meeting that is a procedural issue, if it arises from one of the members of SECU, Public Safety, John McKay will be the chair of that part. And if any procedural issue comes from one of the members of the Immigration Committee, it will be my responsibility. So over to John.
So with that, I'd like to call upon our witnesses to go in what order they choose to go. We are going to be a bit hawkish about time because we have 2 hours, and it's this is a very, very important subject. When we try to signal that the time is up, I appreciate it if you would respect that, and I encourage all honourable members who tend to look away from the chair when their time is expiring to pay attention to the signals of the chair. So with that, I will ask whomever is the lead to introduce himself, herself, and their fellow witnesses. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Patrick Tanguy. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for emergency preparedness and programs at Public Safety, and I'll be the first one to speak. First of all, I just want to give members an overview of the role of public safety. So, public safety is responsible to provide leadership relating to emergency management in Canada and to ensure a coordinated response to events affecting the national interest, including terrorism, human-induced and natural disasters. In 2004, following a wide range of emergencies, the Government Operations Centre was created by the Government of Canada in order to provide a centralized, stable, 24/7 facility to coordinate and support a whole-of-government response to these events. As such, the Government Operations Centre is the principal means by which the Minister of Public Safety exercises leadership role in establishing an integrated federal approach to emergency response as mandated in the Emergency Management Act. The roles and functions of the Government Operations Centre, so its mandate is to support response coordinations of events affecting national interests, as I was saying previously. It is an interdepartmental, and it's important to focus on this, interdepartmental response-focused asset of the Government of Canada working in support of departments and agencies at the national level. So the Government Operations Centre is charged with the following function: provide definitive national level situation awareness to partners and senior decision makers, provide 24/7 watch and early warning for government and in support of partners' mandates, ensure whole-of-government response capability, ensure efficient use of Government of Canada's strategic assets, and when offered, provincial and territorial assets. And so this is, a key asset for ministers and deputy ministers community to get, the mechanism and advice to support their direction. So during operations, its governance of the Government Operations Centre is in accordance with the Federal Emergency Response Plan. So what is the Federal Emergency Response Plans? It is the Government of Canada All Hazards Response Plans designed to harmonize federal emergency response efforts with those of provinces, territories, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. The plan outlines the processes and mechanisms to facilitate an integrated Government of Canada response to an emergency. Maintenant, je vais prendre une minute.
Now I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the situation at l'école. In early 2017, there was a notable increase of migrants seeking refuge in Canada through Emerson, Manitoba. This did not drop off during the summer months, and the number of asylum seekers increased significantly, particularly near the Saint-Bernard de l'École Quebec border crossing. This volume of asylums increased, put a stress on resources of federal government and on those of the provincial authorities that provide accommodation and medical services. On August 4th, the GOC activated an event team to ensure the ongoing whole-of-government coordination of the federal response to manage the influx of asylum seekers arriving in the Saint-Bernard de l'École area. Subsequently, from August 4th to the 28th, departmental liaison officers and subject matter experts from recognized federal agency, the CBSA, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Shared Services Canada arrived at the GOC to identify key requirements for interim lodging, a triage center, and a joint processing center. On August 7th, the province of Quebec requested federal assistance for temporary shelter for the asylum seekers while they waited for determination of eligibility. That same day, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness and the Minister of National Defence promptly accepted the Quebec government's request for federal assistance in dealing with the asylum seeker situations. The GOC has continued to work closely with all of its partners. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about the role that the government operations centers will play with respect to the issue of an emergency intervention plan. Based on the events that occurred in Lacoste and in working in partnership with departments and agencies that are responsible, we have come up with a contingency plan in order to meet with this crisis as we have in with other influences. So I will conclude on that point. Thank you, Mr. Tanguay.
Crampton from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Good morning, Mr. Chairs, honourable committee members. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you this morning with regard to the RCMP's roles and efforts with regard to the current situation of irregular migration. Before addressing the specific situation in Quebec, I would like to first explain the RCMP's enforcement role to place it in context as part of a larger response with federal partners to the influx of asylum seekers we have been experiencing. The RCMP is responsible for border security and enforcing the laws between the ports of entry. To do so, we employ a layered approach involving a targeted deployment of resources and technology, intelligence and information analysis, and leveraging our domestic and international partnerships. The RCMP's primary objectives are to prevent, detect, and disrupt cross-border criminality, as well as respond to other cross-border activities. We meet these objectives by working closely with federal counterparts, such as Canada Border Services Agency, as well as those from the United States, including U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, U.S. Homeland Security investigations. As it relates to border enforcement, the RCMP is at the front line and, for the most part, represents the first point of contact for individuals intercepted between the points of entry who are making a refugee claim. In all cases, the RCMP must put the safety and security of Canada at the forefront, while also ensuring the welfare and well-being of those attempting to enter the country. As we all know, Canada has a requirement for entry either through standard immigration processes or for refugee claims. Failure to report upon entry is an offence under Section 11 of the Customs Act, and any individual who commits an offence may be arrested and subject to removal, detention, fines, or imprisonment. Individuals intercepted by the RCMP are arrested, after which a risk assessment is conducted, including an interview and background check, to determine if there has been any involvement in illegal activities such as drug trafficking or possession of contraband or any connections to organized crime or terrorism. It should be emphasized that the RCMP does not simply intercept and then turn the individuals over to the CBSA. A significant amount of time is taken to confirm the identity and assess activities to ensure there is no threat to Canada or Canadian interests. If threat verification is negative, the claimant is then referred to CBSA for appropriate processing. In the last several months, Canada has been experiencing a spike in asylum seekers, particularly in Quebec, and to a lesser extent in Manitoba and British Columbia. From January to August of this year, the RCMP intercepted 13,211 people entering irregularly to make a refugee claim. The majority of intercepts, 11,896, have occurred in Quebec. In July and August alone, just over 8,500 individuals were intercepted in the Lacal-St. Bernard area of the province. To put this into perspective, total RCMP between ports of entry intercepts across the country for 2016 were approximately 2,500 people. As Canada's national police, the RCMP is present across the country, which allows our organization to adjust enforcement efforts and resources relatively quickly. The RCMP has significantly increased the number of resources allocated to border protection. Additional resources are on the ground in Quebec and have been for several months to provide the required RCMP presence and monitoring, which includes conducting regular patrols along the Quebec-US border. In particular, resources have been deployed near the area of Roxham Road, as this is the point where most irregular crossings are occurring. Currently, the RCMP maintains a 24/7 presence at this location, with temporary facilities and additional infrastructure that have been set up to facilitate the processing of irregular arrivals, including that of a satellite detachment that's in close proximity to CBSA, which allows for promoting efficiencies in overall processes. As previously stated, our primary goal is to protect the safety of Canadians and the integrity of our border. I'm confident in the ability of the RCMP and the partners here today to work together to do so while upholding Canada's long-standing commitment of being a nation that welcomes those in need. Officials are working diligently to ensure our response is effective as things continue to evolve, and interdepartmental work that has been taken to date is commendable. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you. Now from the Canada Border Services Agents, Jacques Cloutier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On behalf of the agency, and to have this opportunity to contribute to your study, your joint committee study of arrivals between Canada's ports of entry. Mon nom est Jacques Cloutier, je suis le vice-président.
My name is Jacques Cloutier, and I'm acting Vice President of the agency's operation branch of the CBSA. As members of both committees are aware, the agency has a dual mandate to facilitate travel and trade at the border while protecting the safety and security of Canadians at the border. Together with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, the CBSA administers the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, which governs both the admissibility of people into Canada and the identification, detention, and removal of those deemed to be inadmissible under the Act.
Must demonstrate that they meet the requirements to enter and to stay. Mr. Chair, I would like to turn now the focus of this special joint committee meeting, the arrival of asylum seekers who travel between designated ports of entry from the United States. We continue to emphasize in our communications and outreach that coming to Canada in this fashion is both a violation of the law and potentially dangerous. At the same time, in accordance with Canadian values and our humanitarian tradition, individuals who seek asylum in Canada must be treated with compassion and afforded due process under the law. L'Agence continue d'appliquer les règles rigoureuses sur
Rigorous immigration and custom rules must be followed, which the agency continues to apply to protect Canada's border while respecting domestic and international obligations. Those who enter Canada outside of ports of entry are arrested by the RCMP or local law enforcement and are brought to CBSA officers at a port of entry for processing. Asylum seekers undergo a rigorous process to determine whether or not they have a legitimate claim according to Canadian and international law. Our robust security screening process includes interviews with claimants and the collection of information and biometrics to help us confirm their identity.
Records for any immigration, criminal, or national security concerns against Canadian, international, and other partner databases. No one leaves the port of entry without completing this first initial security screening. And in cases of concern, the interviews are treated entirely at the port of entry. All eligible claims are assessed by the Immigration and Refugee Board. If the IRB determines that they are not in need of Canada's protection, the CBSA may remove them from Canada. Many federal government departments, along with provincial and local partners, are working together to address the current situation at the Canada-US border. Nous déployons tous les efforts.
We are making every effort to ensure that adequate resources are available at key locations to address volumes, using all of the technology, intelligence, and partnerships at our disposal to monitor and respond appropriately. With IRCC, the agency has put in place contingency plans to redeploy staff and expedite intake processing. The agency has deployed resources to the regions of highest activity between ports of entry, such as L'École. To effectively manage volumes at L'École, asylum claimants who have cleared security and health-related checks are moved inland, where IRCC and CBSA officers continue the process to determine their eligibility to claim asylum in Canada.
We have increased our capacity on several fronts in Montreal. We have more than tripled our daily processing output. And to conclude, Mr. Chair, as key partners in the admissibility continuum, we continue in close collaboration with our partners to give this situation all the attention it deserves. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Cloutier. And finally, from the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Michael McDonald, Paul McKinnon, and Louis Dumas.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the committee chairs for inviting us to speak today, and I will be brief, noting the time, chairs. My name is Michael McDonald, and I am a Director General in the Operations Sector at Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Of course, I'm joined today by my colleagues Paul McKinnon and Louis Dumas. Mon intervention aujourd'hui portera.
My remarks today will focus on IRCC's operational efforts in response to the asylum seekers arriving in Quebec this past summer.
Between ports of entry, IRCC's role is to assist the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, in the eligibility determination process after individuals crossing the border have been intercepted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Les demandeurs d'asile recevables sont ensuite.
Eligible claims are then referred to the Independent Quasi-Judicial Immigration and Refugee Board, the IRB. This is a quasi-judicial agency, and this organization will hear the asylum claim.
The number of intercepts and refugee claimants, IRCC and the CBSA began to reassign staff and expedite processing to alleviate backlogs in determining asylum claimants' eligibility to be referred for a hearing to the Immigration and Refugee Board. In our department, IRCC, we increased our capacity in the following ways. We opened a new floor and reception room at our Peel Street Joint Processing Centre in downtown Montreal, allowing us to process more than triple the output of claimants every day. IRCC also set up operations at a temporary processing facility at Complexe Guy Favreau in downtown Montreal, and we have expanded this facility to include a dedicated service counter to help those who have already completed their application forms come in and reschedule their interviews with IRCC for an earlier date. Thus far, more than 2,400 asylum seekers have used this dedicated service counter, and we launched it on September 5th. Par ces mesures, nous nous employons à
Through these measures, we are working to reduce the wait times for eligibility interviews from a few months to a few weeks, after which eligible claims are referred to the independent IRB.
Is crucial because in order to apply for an open work permit, an asylum seeker must first have their initial eligibility interview, having their claim referred to the IRB, and undergo an immigration medical examination. To also help ease pressures, IRCC has begun to fast-track all work permit applications across Canada from asylum claimants, with a commitment to process these within 30 days. In most cases, asylum claimants become eligible for Interim Federal Health Program, IFHP, coverage only after an officer has determined that their claim is eligible to be heard before the IRB. IFH coverage is now available to asylum seekers who enter Canada between ports of entry in Lacal and are being processed on or after June 1st and who have not yet had an eligibility interview. To date, more than 5,600 persons have been issued this Interim Federal Health Program coverage under this special provision. In closing, Chairs, IRCC, with the CBSA and all other partners in the federal family, continue to address irregular migration in accordance with Canadian and international law and in keeping with our values of an open and welcoming country. Je vous remercie encore une fois de m'avoir donné l'occasion.
Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Each of you, and for your testimony, but also your respect for the time limitations. I'm rather hoping that members will have similar respect for time limitations. There is a parallel process. The Immigration Committee and the Public Safety Committee have exactly the same processes. And so the first 7-minute rounds will go 7-minute Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Liberal, and then 5-minute rounds Conservative, Liberal, NDP. So I'm going to call on Madame Zayed for the first Liberal 7-minute round.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to all the witnesses for coming and providing information on this important issue. My first question is, the border between Canada and United States is nearly 9,000 kilometers long. It includes lakes, mountains, farmer fields, and even towns. Is there any realistic action that could be taken that would prevent irregular border crossing?
Thank you, Chair, for the question.
MP.
I think it will be for RCMP because you control.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of investigations and in terms of border security, we deploy already a lot of different techniques, as well as people working on the border itself. So I wouldn't be privileged to be able to speak to a lot of those techniques, obviously for investigative reasons and security reasons. But we do security all the way along the border throughout, whether it's on lakes or on land as well.
Thank you. So we should be assured that proper measures are being taken.
Absolutely.
My next question would be for the IRCC. Is there any evidence that asylum seekers are not getting a fair and impartial hearing in the United States, or that any of the terms of the Safe Third Country Agreement have been breached?
I can respond to that, Mr. Chair. It's our view that the U.S. refugee determination system is fair, is credible, and there's nothing happening with the U.S. refugee determination system that would cause us to be concerned about the Safe Third Country Agreement as it now stands.
Are all the conditions being met for this? Are all the conditions for the Safe Third Country Agreement are being met?
Indeed, yes.
Has there been some assessment done on that case?
Yes, we do a review on a regular basis of the situation in the U.S. We look at their refugee determination system. We look at their policies around immigration broadly, We did one just a few months ago, even after the executive orders came out, and we maintain that their system is fair and does not affect the Safe Third Country Agreement as it now stands.
Thank you. My next question is also for the IRCC. Could you please outline the responsibilities that Canada has under the United Nations 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and the 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees, as well as under the Canadian law when a person within Canada's border makes an asylum claim?
I mean, generally, Mr. Chair, we have to respond to the convention and ensure that folks are not being returned to mistreatment, to torture, that the conditions for which they are claiming exist in their home country. We look through those in great detail, and the IRB, as an independent body, will ensure that that person is not going back to any type of persecution, whether that be torture or mistreatment. But we can certainly, Mr. Chair, give you the exact details and share that with the committee, but I would provide that as a general response, Mr. Chair.
Can that information be provided to us?
Certainly. We can provide that later today.
Thank you. My next question is, could you provide some more insight on what background and security checks are performed on an irregular crosser making an asylum claim before they are released? And is there any evidence these irregular crossers, if not intercepted at the border, are not reporting to authorities to make an asylum claim? To CBSA. CBSA.
I will defer to my colleague from the RCMP to begin, and I will complete the answer afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of someone crossing the border between the ports of entry, the RCMP would intercept the person or persons. We then advise them that they are breaking the law by crossing the border under the Customs Act, crossing the border in between ports of entry. The person or persons are then detained. Their possessions are searched to ensure there's no contraband or other illegal items. They are also searched, their person is searched because they are under arrest. Under the Customs Act, we then verify their identification, do background checks and local indices checks, as well as international indices checks. If there's no noted criminality or any concerns for national security, once we've interviewed them and had a lengthy discussion as to where they came from, looking at what their intentions are, if there's nothing negative that comes as a result of that, we then pass the individual over to Canada Border Services for further processing.
At this point for the CBSA, we received the individual from the RCMP as well as the information collected by the RCMP. We proceed with fingerprinting, the taking of biometric information, a cursory interview to elicit additional information. We verify identity. In those cases where we are satisfied that there are no immigration-related issues from an admissibility perspective, these individuals would be released on the terms and conditions and given an appointment to complete their eligibility interview. In cases where issues are discovered, several actions are taken immediately, including completing the interview for eligibility in its entirety, or proceeding with detention if the person is deemed to pose a risk to the public.
My last question is to the IRCC officials. I understand that a lot of misunderstandings and bad information is circulating in the Haitian and Hispanic communities, among others, has fueled the irregular crossings by leading to the false impression of an easy asylum claim in Canada. Could you provide some detail what is being done to get better information among these communities specifically?
20 seconds to do that, so if you could do it very briefly and then maybe work it into some other response. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. A number of outreach activities have taken place both in the United States and in Canada. Currently in Montreal, we are reaching out especially to the Haitian community, through a variety of different channels, including social media, including reaching out to refugee organizations, and also to the regular media. So things are well underway, and we're passing on the message that individuals should come to our dedicated service counter at Guy Favreau to avail themselves of the possibility of doing their eligibility process.
Thank you, Ms. Zayed, Mr. Dumas, Ms. Rempel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the beginning of 2017, what percentage of asylum claims made by people illegally crossing the border between Canada and the U.S. have been processed?
I don't actually have the exact percentage for the entire year being processed. It often is moving with the volumes that are coming through.
And I am going to interrupt just because of time. Can you please table that number with committee? Can you also please table the percentage of claims that have been rejected? Thank you. Similarly, can you please table with committee the following information? With respect to border crossings occurring at unofficial points of entry since the beginning of 2017, can you please provide a full breakdown of costs associated with asylum claims made by people illegally crossing the border for winterized trailers installed at the U.S.-Canada border, perimeter fencing and lighting for winterized trailers, the use of Montreal's Olympic Stadium to house border crossers, the tent village built to house asylum seekers along the Canadian-U.S. border, any other temporary accommodations used to house asylum seekers crossing the border, any other costs associated with housing and supporting asylum seekers, including food, any relevant transfers made to provincial governments related to the increase in asylum seekers crossing the border, any relevant transfers to municipal governments related to the increase in asylum seekers crossing the border, any transportation provided to asylum seekers crossing the U.S.-Canada border, all costs associated with opening and operating the new floor and reception room at the Peel Street Joint Processing Centre that you alluded to, as well as the number of staff reallocated to the Peel Street Processing Centre and what streams of processing those staff have been reallocated from, as well as similar information for the processing facility that has been opened at Complex Guy Favreau. Can that be tabled with the committee?
Yes, it will.
Thank you. When?
I'd have to look into the department. I think that's a lot of data, but we will do our best to do that as fast as possible.
An IRCC official stated that we are taking a number of proactive measures both in Canada and abroad to counter misinformation that has been circulating and ensuring everyone is aware of the facts about Canada's asylum system. This was an IRCC spokesperson, Hirsch Jaswal. Does a formal plan exist? Is there a formal departmental plan that has been written to communicate this information?
There is. We have a communications and an outreach plan that we are following.
Can you please table that with committee?
I will take that back, yes.
Thank you. Earlier this week, we heard that there was a CBC article that stated that Nigerian asylum claims were wanting to come to Canada, quote, because they were aware of the pipeline. What additional measures is IRCC taking to outreach into the broader international community that the asylum claim system is not a free ticket to Canada, quote?
We've done several things, the first of which is to look at our communications and outreach plan and determine the best way in which to reach the Nigerian diaspora population here, as well as in the United States, and as well back in Nigeria itself. Second, we are also liaising and working with our American colleagues. We have a mission overseas, as does other allied partners. So we've also gone back to our immigration program overseas to try and look at ways and ideas that we can reach populations.
Thank you. Over to Mr. McGuire.
Thank you as well. Just a couple of quick questions in regards to perhaps, because of the time frame here, I'll get you to table some of these answers as well. But what's the average full cost per failed asylum claimant to the Government of Canada? It would be, I don't know if you can provide that off the top right now.
It varies on the individual cases, but overall, as a general estimate, one can look at anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000. But I think it will give you a more precise response, but it very much does vary.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that response. And what are the social service costs being borne by provinces while asylum claimants await the IRB hearings?
On average, the number I gave you includes the social cost to the provinces and territories.
If you could include that in your answer, that'd be great. Thanks. And the specific medical, I know there was some reference to it. What are the specific medical background and security check claimants go through before they're referred to the IRB, and how many people have been allowed to move forward and how many have been denied following those initial checks. If you could include that in it as well, please.
Just for precision, Chair, do you mean in the medical sphere, or do you mean in other inadmissibilities around criminality and or any other ineligibility?
Yeah,
just for precision, that's
in
all.
all of those. Yeah, please.
Mr. McGuire, are you directing that question to IRB, or are you directing it to Border Services?
Well, both, I guess, if we could get an answer on that, but IRB for sure in that area, and anything that might be there as well. Just wondering how many people have been allowed to move forward and how many have been denied following those initial checks as well. Would be from the Border Services as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I can briefly answer that now. Overall, in terms of the Lacal movement itself and in terms of the Haitian movement, the vast majority of individuals are being determined eligible to move forward to the IRB. It is a very significant number. The IRB's decision is a different situation, but overall the movement in Lacal is proceeding through eligibility, admissibility, health checks, and so on.
Thank you. And so out of this, how many individuals seeking refuge status in Canada have been specifically mentioned earlier? The Prime Minister made a tweet that I quote, regardless of who you are or where you come from, there's always a place for you in Canada, end quote. And I'm wondering how many individuals seeking refugee status have specifically mentioned that tweet of the Prime Minister's as they sought refuge in Canada.
That is not a specific question we asked during the admissibility, eligibility determination process.
And I know that, I'm just asking, okay, I'm just asking how many of them have offered that type of an answer or that response, because we know there's been some in Manitoba. So I just wanted to say, on the CBSA, we know and understand at least that they didn't meet the targets for removing failed refugee claimants from Canada. The target was to remove 80% of them, I believe, within 1 year, and there's still 50 or only 47% of them were removed. So the other 53% that are still in Canada.
Mr. McGuire, thank you.
Okay.
Madame Guan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for their presentation. This has been a long time coming. I've been trying to get a study with respect to irregular crossings for almost a year now, and it has been shut down 4 times by the government members. So this is a really good beginning of a new session and with a new chair. And so in this regard, I'm particularly interested in actually getting the sense of how many cases to the IRB, to the IRCC, how many cases have been accepted through the IRB. Do you know how many cases have been processed and accepted from the IRB with these asylum seekers?
That's a complex and multi-layered response, because asylum seeking goes on all during the year. We just saw the real peak over this year.
So let me be very specific with the very peak that we're talking about and with this particular subset of asylum seekers.
So in terms of the greatest peak this year, which has been in the month of August, those claims are being worked through, but the IRB has yet to hear them. They're being scheduled now. In addition, the IRB does have its dedicated task force, which is existing to look specifically at this issue over a 3-month period.
So I'm interested about the comment about how the United States on the Safe Third Country Agreement piece, that everything is good. Yet we do know, for example, there's one case that I do know of Mr. Sadhu Mohammed, who crossed over in the dead of winter, lost digits as a result of it. His claim was rejected in the United States, and yet when he came to Canada, his claim was accepted. This is an outed LGBTQ man from Ghana. So, and then as well, Amnesty International also did a study, if you will, though informal, and the people that they interview indicate that they don't feel safe in the United States, and that's why they are crossing over. And so there seems to be some discrepancy with reality, at least from the IRCC perspective and the government's perspective, versus what people are experiencing on the ground, which I think is very important to note. And so Now, with this large influx in the last year, I would say, and yes, it peaked in the summer for Quebec. It peaked in Manitoba in the summer, I was sorry, in the winter. So there are different periods of time where it peaked. So right now, you're telling, am I understanding correctly that these cases have been referred to IRB, and for the vast majority of them, they have not been heard? So what is then the wait times for people waiting for the cases to be heard? How does that compare to previous times? And also, in terms of the resources, in the meantime, for these individuals, who is providing resources for them to house them? Is it the province? And has the government provided additional resources to the province to support these asylum seekers? And along with that, the NGOs that are on the ground who's doing this work, are they provided additional resources as well? And if so, how much?
Thank you, Chair. A lot of parts to that. I'll generally answer as quickly as I can, Ms. Kwan. In terms of the IRB, I understand that next week, next Tuesday, I believe the IRB is appearing with IRCC officials so we can get more clarity on how the IRB is scheduling, and the IRB is coming up with some innovative ways to work through this massive movement that they now have before them. In terms of the stats of how the IRB decisions are coming out, particularly on the Haitian population for 2017, I'll let the IRB speak to that. In terms of the housing, yes, indeed, the provinces are the ones that have carriage of helping asylum seekers until they become permanent residents post-IRB hearing. At that case,
if I may interrupt then, can you share the information with the committee then? Has the federal government provided any additional resources to the provinces with these asylum seekers? And not just for the housing component, but also for the component of supporting the asylum seekers as they wait for their claims to be processed?
The federal government does not provide direct support to provinces for asylum seekers awaiting their claims. The support comes at the permanent resident granting determination process afterwards. That said, we have taken various measures to help the provinces and to help asylum seekers by expediting across Canada all work permit applications and trying
How many, if I may interrupt then, how many work permit applications has been processed and approved?
About 7 weeks ago, we had roughly over 6,000 work permit applications for all asylum seekers across Canada in our inventory. That is now almost eliminated, and we are processing in under 30 days any new asylum seekers work permit across Canada that is coming in. We are doing those in well under 30 days. The idea is to help people get into the workforce quicker.
So on the question around, so back to the resource from the provinces, so the federal government does not provide any resources to the provincial governments to manage the situation. NGOs are not getting a dime from the federal government to deal with the situation on the ground. I know in British Columbia, for example, one NGO is actually about to close their doors. They've had to turn asylum seekers away because they have no resources. People who are coming over are now rendered homeless in shelters, and the federal government knows this. Has the federal government taken any action with respect to that in supporting the provinces in dealing with the situation? Most notably in BC, but BC not alone. In Manitoba, for example, the NGOs who stepped up to deal with the situation, they're still out of pocket, by the way, on the lack of resources from any level of government with respect to that. And so has the federal government done any work with respect to that?
So
about 30 seconds to answer that question.
I'll be very brief. The assistance that the federal government does give to the provinces and territories to help for this population, specifically around the asylum, is part of the overall social transfers that go through any of the housing.
So there's no
strategies
additional dollars?
transfers.
No additional dollars?
No additional dollars. The dollars are with existing programs.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kwan, Mr. McDonald. Monsieur Dubois.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for their presentations. My first question will be for Ms. Crampton. It was said that the UN Convention Against Torture and other mistreatment means that people need to have an assessment on a case-by-case basis. In your opinion, do you feel that this convention has been respected by Canada? That is, we have not removed those people who have been subject to torture.
In terms of the RCMP's role when people are crossing between borders, as I mentioned, our responsibility is to assess, to make sure of their background. We're looking for any links to possible terrorism, bringing in contraband, anything, any terms of illegal activity. And that's our role in terms of assessing the people. We do so through background checks, through searches of their person, and through interviews. And from there, we would then pass it to CBSA to make a determination with their process.
OK. Merci. Donc, ça veut dire qu'il y a une entente, effectivement.
Thank you. There is an agreement in place. Also, a question for the RCMP. Have you established any special measures this summer at the border or to deal with these claimants, or do you just do it on an ad hoc basis?
We have put in special process. We have a processing, like a satellite detachment that's in close proximity to CBSA that facilitates our joint partnership there. And we also have a temporary processing center of sorts at Roxham Road, which is where the majority of people are crossing at this time. So we have set up special facilities there in order to accommodate the people coming through and accommodate our employees who are working there. So they're working in a safe environment.
Good. Donc, merci. En parlant de safe environment.
Thank you. In talking about a safe responsibility, you have a responsibility, we have a responsibility to protect Canadians. Have you experienced any situations at the border with respect to criminality? Can you attach any numbers to that? With respect to these 13,000 people who have come in, what's the level of criminality that you have seen with respect to these people?
Question. It's exceptionally low in terms of what we've seen for criminality. Any sort of criminality that we find that requires further investigation, we would pass on to the police of jurisdiction, depending on the province where the people are coming through. And from there, they would be processed through the regular criminal process by the police of jurisdiction. And they would determine whether charges would be laid or further investigation would be warranted. But in terms of Quebec in particular, there has been very, very, very low percentage of people that have been involved in criminality.
Merci. Je voudrais, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, my next question will be towards the Department of Citizenship and Immigration. You know that this influx or massive influx of immigrants or claimants occurred starting back in July, followed by another spike in August. I believe 100 people were crossing the border per day. The government sent over issues, including myself, to meet with members of the Haitian community because there was a lot of misinformation circulating, namely that Canada was open to anyone. My colleague Pablo Rodriguez from Argentina originally, who speaks Spanish, also got involved. Could you explain the impact that these two missions had at the border? And my question is directed to IRCC.
Monsieur le Président, pour la question. C'est une question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. This is very important. Efforts made both in the United States and even here in communities in Canada have yielded results. What's important is that people get accurate information, namely that if you cross a border illegally, that doesn't lead necessarily to permanent residency. We have a process in place, a determination process for a refugee, and this is all done with the CBSA, and it's important that people understand this process, and I think that efforts were made to ensure that people know about this, and the efforts were much appreciated. Thank you. You said that there was an intergovernmental committee between Quebec and Ontario. How has this ad hoc committee helped you to deal with this massive influx of claimants?
Any interdepartmental task force, the whole concept of ensuring that we are working together, that our plans are well known, they're well devised, and we respect each other's individual operational needs, individual communication needs, policy needs, housing needs, social needs. All of this is discussed by this body. It's really about alignment, and it's really about making sure that we can proceed as fast as we can with our operational plans, and it's also about communication to Canadians. It's also about all levels of government working towards this issue and helping Canada respond.
Une dernière question, le temps.
One final question. Time is flying. Less than 30 seconds. You know that there are cities that want to welcome claimants because they have labor shortages. What measures is IRCC taking to ensure that these people are able to get into the labor force?
Seconds. The key to this from our perspective is really allowing all claimants, asylum claimants, to get the work permit faster and to be able to enter the workforce if they have to. At the same time, we work with community organizations as part of our regular outreach, and we do that across Canada. So partnerships and really getting that work permit is the key.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. Thank you, Mr. DeBourge. Mr. Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the witnesses for coming in today. I'll be asking a lot of questions specific to the RCMP and CBSA only. Don't be offended if I interrupt you. There's a lot of questions that I do want to get through. So, do either of your agencies have a detailed accounting of the actual number of resources deployed and all the costs related to the reallocation of those resources to deal with a large number of illegal border crossers, including their per diems, travel, accommodation, staffing costs, including overtime?
So these figures are being vetted at the moment, and it's our intention to release them as soon as we have the degree of comfort that allows us to do it.
Okay, and the same with the RCMP?
The same, yes. We're looking at incremental costs and tracking those incremental costs.
Can you please provide those to both committees at your earliest convenience? Additionally, recent news articles have indicated that that multiple border crossers have been in possession of, for example, child pornography. And when they crossed the border, that was reported in the Global News, and I understand that there were no national guidelines in place prior to these occurrences. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of someone crossing with something such as child pornography, the criminal code would apply, and again, we would look at the police of jurisdiction to investigate such an occurrence. And those occurrences have been very, very low.
I appreciate that, but there was no national guidelines to deal with those occurrences with respect to the illegal border crossers. Is that correct?
The criminal code would apply, so yes, there are.
Okay, and now you have those guidelines in place and you're following them. Is there any other contraband or areas of criminality where national guidelines are in place or need to be in place?
Everything that we would look at falls under the criminal code, so possession of child pornography would fall criminal code, and so we would process that as we would anyone else in Canada in possession of child pornography or any other contraband or anything that would fall under the criminal code itself.
Okay, and if you have those guidelines, can you please provide them to both committees, please?
Certainly.
I understand that resources have been reallocated from across the country to deal with illegal border crossers, as we know. And I understand that these reallocations are having, in some circumstances, negative impact on the communities policed by the RCMP, as well as some border crossings from across the country where resources are being depleted. I have a two-part question. So do either of your agencies have an accounting of the service reductions and impacts these reallocations are having? And if you do, great, can you provide those in writing to the committee? And if you don't, can you give us a timeline of when those allocations can be, impacts can be provided to us? And has your enforcement, the second part of the question is has your enforcement capabilities been reduced at official ports of entry with inland enforcement officers for deportation hearings and the community expectations for policing such that it strains current resources or limits their normal enforcement duties and roles?
So on this point, Mr. Chair, it's been the practice of the CBSA to respond by deploying resources in a way that does not jeopardize the operations across the country. Our approach has been measured and it's been responsible. You will note that generally speaking over the summer, there's been very little issues at any of our ports with respect to border wait time, and that's because of the approach that we've taken, being measured in the deployment of our resources to respond as was required. Okay. So I do not believe that there have been issues such as the ones you've highlighted.
Okay.
In terms of the RCMP, we've reallocated federal resources from across Canada as we would for any significant event. And this does not impact frontline policing because they are federal resources dedicated, and we do already have several dedicated to border.
I have time for one more question. As we know that CBSA handles the screening and the evaluation and deportation of illegal border crossers. And I understand also that many times once a person is been determined to be deported, you're either going to detain them in custody or they're free. Once a hearing has been ordered to be deported, how long until they're actually removed from the country is one question. What's the average cost for an immigrant to be detained, and what's the average cost for someone to be removed from the country to their country of origin? If you don't have those with you in my limited time, can you please provide those to both committees in writing, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll certainly provide the information, but I think it's important to know in a very general sense that removals are prioritized depending on issues related to...
So I'm just going to interrupt you for one last one. Yeah. So approximately how many illegal border crossers are currently ordered deported?
I appreciate your effort to extend your time, Mr. Motz, but it's not going to work. Some combination of Mr. Tabara and Mr. Fragicata's daughters.
Got it.
Yes. So whoever is lead.
Marlon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the committee for being here. There's a notion, a myth, that asylum seekers entering Canada from the United States are taking away spots from other refugee claimants. Can you describe that this is, I've heard that this is a separate channel. Can you please describe that and clarify that for the committee?
Yes, this is a myth, and we've been dealing with that on an educational level. There's different kinds of refugees that come to Canada, or persons that would eventually be protected persons or asylum seekers. Overseas refugee selection, those we select overseas and bring to Canada, are in a completely different, to put it simply, a completely different stream and a completely different processing way. Asylum seeking has always existed. We have systems set up to do this separate kind of stream. The two do not commingle in terms of from a processing perspective. Spots are not taken from each other.
Also, if you can provide the committee with previous numbers of asylum seekers, if you can maybe go back to maybe 2005 till now, just to see the numbers, because I think some people are not understanding that maybe in 1 month that you might have seen a high number, but if you take a whole year, you might see a larger number, which we may have had prior in 2007, 8, or 9, etc. So if you can provide that with the committee, that would be beneficial.
Chair, I can provide that right now if you'd like.
That's excellent. If you
okay, and I will be quick. I'll read off numbers very fast. Overall, the point is this. Asylum seeking in Canada has its natural ebbs and flows, and even through the year and the months, it has its natural ebbs and flows. It is tied up to things like visa regimes, and when we don't have visa regimes. It's tied up to world movements, natural disasters, wars, civil conflict. So there's a lot of push and pull factors. That said, in 2004, for example, there were just over 25,000 asylum seekers. We jumped to 2007, that number goes up to 28,000. 2009, you see it going up to 33,000. However, 2010, it drops down to 23,000. I'm giving gross numbers here, chairs. 2011, we see a spike back up to 25,000. What's interesting, though, is in 2012, we see 20,500 and a few, but then in 2013, that goes down to 10,400. We then see that climbing in 2015 up to 16,000. What's key for us is last year, in 2016, there were 23,000 915 asylum seekers that came into Canada. That number obviously is very different today, thus far this year. We are looking at just over 32,000 asylum seekers. In other words, this represents a fairly significant increase over last year's numbers. Where 2018 goes, again, you can see the historical comparisons. It's very hard to predict what happens, and the world stage really has a real impact on that.
Thank you very much. I'll be sharing the rest of my time with Mr. Fragaskatos.
Thank you very much. You cited numbers there, and thank you for doing that. There was a recent study put forward by the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy that said that based on estimates they've put together from the Department of Immigration, by the end of the year, 36,000 people will have come into seeking asylum in Canada. And then they compare that to previous years. And in fact, it's quite interesting because I think it's important to put things into context. None of you have a political role. This might come as a huge surprise, but politicians sometimes take advantage of things for political gain and ignore the context. So let's put things into context. In 2000, 38,000 people, according to this study, sought asylum in Canada. In 2001, 45,000 sought asylum. In 2008, 37,000 sought asylum. And so while the numbers are quite high this year at around 36,000, we've dealt with these challenges before. And obviously, the sky has not fallen, if I can put it that way. Could you speak to this? Because I think there's a sense in the country right now that this is a unique crisis. But it is obviously not a unique crisis. We've met these challenges before, as I say. Could you speak to that?
Unfortunately, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Fragaskatos has used all but 10 seconds of your time.
Oh.
So if you have a 10-second answer,
I think you raise an excellent point about the movement of migration and people. We also have to remember that the Canadian border is extremely long. Asylum seekers move through natural corridors. There's about 4 natural corridors across Canada. What is different about this year compared to other years, and this is the anomaly, is a large number of people using one specific corridor through Laval, Quebec. Otherwise, the immigration patterns, as well as the nationalities, is actually very much aligned with the historical trends.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you.
Mr. Bernier.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Ça me fait plaisir.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here today. I have a few questions with respect to the border situation in Quebec. We know that this situation will cost the government of Quebec a lot of money. The government of Quebec has already begun to issue checks to these illegal immigrants. I'd like to know if you are aware of any agreement signed between Quebec and Quebec to receive reimbursement for the money that the government of Quebec has had to spend to deal with this crisis.
Such agreement.
OK. On sait que les gens traversent.
We know that people are crossing Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. That's where the real problem is. Have you thought about making Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle, that area, have you thought about making it an official port of entry? Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are various factors that are being considered right now to deal with the situation, including the one that you just mentioned, Mr. Bernier. We are discussing these matters at present, but we don't have an official present to date. In other words, the government of Quebec could decrease the influx of illegal immigrants, depending on how you view the situation, by creating an official port of entry where people cross the border. That would be one solution that could be adopted if the government were to decide so. So do you think that it would take weeks or months to deploy this? This is a scenario, Mr. Chairman, that is currently being studied. We continue to work on this file, but I'm not able to answer a question to deal with a hypothetical situation which is still under review. from an operational viewpoint, there are other issues that need to be measured and checked and which are currently being analyzed. Are we prepared for a second wave of immigration, irregular or illegal immigration? Are there any emergency measures that have been considered? If we look what's happened in the past and what we can expect in the future, can we expect a second wave of people from other nationalities? Mr. Chair, on that point, for several months now, we've been working on contingency plans, not only to deal with this summer's situation, but also for the future, should there be additional movement of people at other inland areas of Canada. And we are working with the colleagues from the Government Operations Centre. Could you provide us with more details about these contingency plans, including the one that I alluded to earlier with respect to making Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle an official port of entry? What other contingency plans are you considering? Mr. Chair, once again, when it comes to making Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle a port of entry to deal with the Roxham Road crossings, I'm looking at this from the operational viewpoint. Those are the aspects I'm looking at. As far as the contingency plans concerned, we have to look at our ability to deploy elsewhere in the country should we deal with a similar situation that we're seeing in the Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. And we work in cooperation with our colleagues from the RCMP and other agencies. Thank you. With respect to the verification of criminal records of people entering the country, it was said earlier that you verify these criminal records. Is it possible that people leave their passports or identification papers behind them when they leave the United States? What's the percentage of people in the past year who do in fact have a criminal record?
With me, I would be able to provide that if that.
Yeah, perfect. And also at the same time, how many people did you ask them to leave the country because they had a judiciary background that is against our law in Canada? Can you give us the data about that?
15 seconds or less, please. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the RCMP role, we're simply looking at threats to Canada, threats to security. So our role is very different. CBSA would be more engaged in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Bernier. Appreciate it.
Merci.
Mr. Spingaman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all 6 of you for being here today. Thank you for your service and your important work. This is a joint session that reflects the increasing complexity of the work that faces parliamentarians. I'd like to thank our 2 chairs for the leadership it took to make this meeting happen. And I'd like to focus my questions on the human element of the situation that we're facing, the qualitative side, both from the perspective of the claimants, but also the perspective of the women and men who do the law enforcement and immigration analysis work. And I'd like to start with a question on the running of security checks. My colleague, Ms. Saeed, has alluded to it earlier on. When you face, Canadians want to be sure that they are safe, and when you face applicants who have potentially no background documentation, and you face claimants from jurisdictions that may not cooperate with requests for security background checks in their jurisdiction, how can we be sure that the cases that are the people that are being admitted to Canada actually have gone through a background check that is as close to perfect as we can get it?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. On this very point, I think it's important to note that as we conduct our verification at the port of entry through biometric record checks, if there are concerns around the identity of the individual that presents, that person will likely be detained until that ambiguity can be resolved. And the process of reviewing the claim as such is suspended until we're satisfied that we know who the person is and we know what the history of that person is.
Okay. And now from the perspective of a constituency politician who sometimes or often gets inquiries on immigration cases, when it comes to security and background checks, security background checks in particular, is it fair to say then that this is one of the most labor-intensive aspects of the department's work, and also potentially one of the most time-consuming and lengthy.
Thank you. It's a lengthy process in that it's one that we do in a very rigorous manner. It's labor intensive in that our preoccupation is to ensure the safety of Canadians as we go through the process. But it's one that we do on a daily basis. It's more obvious now because of the situation that evolved over the summer. But these types of verifications happen on a daily basis at all of our ports of entry. It's very much part and parcel of what we do. Okay. And it's what I was referring to earlier when I talked about our dual mandate of facilitation, but also ensuring the protection of Canadians.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you of your perception of the stories that are coming our way. I realize that you're not on the front lines, but from what you've heard working with colleagues, what is the story of this particular group of applicants that's come to or through our borders in the past months? What kind of narratives, what kind of challenges, just to make it real for the Canadian public of who is coming our way here?
I'll answer that question, Chair. In response to an earlier question, we have done some very limited conversations as part of the eligibility determination process at IRCC with people, asking them some very basic questions about why, what they were thinking, how did they end up here, and so on. Again, overall, you're talking about over 32,000 asylum claimants. Getting a general sense is difficult. However, what we have learned from the interviews of admissibility, eligibility, and then some of the questions we've done, plus the outreach, the conversations that have gone on in the United States and elsewhere, a variety of factors are pushing people north. I'll be quite honest, social media is a very significant factor in how people are making what looks to be a very quick decision in their life. Overall, it's not any one particular reason that people are moving. Some people are very, very much fearing persecution for themselves, from their government. Others are just following a trend on social media.
Thanks very much for that. Very briefly, time is limited. What are the gender-specific aspects of your work? Are there gender components, both in the law enforcement and immigration side?
Maybe I'll just go with the immigration side. I mean, overall, when you look at the movement through Lacal in particular, it tends to be males primarily. However, there are a significant number of children. And the age variation is usually in between that 30 to 50-year-old in the adult population, and the children are a variety of ages. Again, not necessarily different from normal trends. However, we are seeing a good number of children coming with family units.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Dubé for the final 3 minutes of this round.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairs, Mr. Cloutier, you talk about the decrease in wait times, but this must be impacting the customs officers. What about PTSD amongst your officers? And you've mentioned that there's a lack of personnel at these particular crossings. I think that I would say at the outset that the health and welfare of our employees is one of our main priorities. We work in partnership with colleagues in the union on a very active basis, and we ensure that we monitor the situations. Border services officers have the privilege of, we have the privilege of working on a very professional force. They're very committed to their work. They are given good training, and we do everything in our, but if I may, I have limited time, but what explains then the contradiction between the union's request that says they don't have enough human resources and the fact that your agency says that it doesn't want to go to the minister to ask additional resources and do assist? No, the agency has never said that we didn't want to make any requests. The minister was very clear. He said he's waiting for requests if there are in fact requests, but given the current situations, I am continuing to assess the situation to ensure we have adequate resources to deliver services in order to meet with the requirements of the Lacolle situation. Mr. MacDonald, you said in terms of countries of origin that it was different from other years, but you said that there has been a concentration at this particular crossing. Could you explain why we're witnessing this phenomenon? Perhaps why do you think that there are an increased number of asylum claimants in this particular area?
Different populations migrate into Canada through different corridors from the United States, largely because different diaspora communities are centralized in different areas in the United States. For example, in Minnesota and so on, you have a high degree of Somali, Djibouti, and places like that, whereas on the Pacific coast, you have a lot of Chinese, Iraqi, Afghan individuals, and so on. What's unique about the Lacolle situation is Haiti has a significant number of individuals post the earthquake located in Miami and New York City. Plus, the French-speaking language draws a lot of the Haitian claimants into Montreal, largely for their children to go to French-speaking primary and secondary schools.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé, Mr. MacDonald, and the time remaining together, I'll turn over to my joint chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On va commencer avec le deuxième round maintenant.
Mr. Chair, we'll begin our second round. We'll start with the Liberals, but just before I proceed,
just to let you know, I think it would be helpful to send it to the clerks of both committees at the same time, except the criminal code. It's very thick, and we have it. So thank you, Ms. Crampton. On va commencer avec Monsieur Picard.
begin with Mr. Picard. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Ms. Damoff. First of all, before I begin, I'd like to underscore the professionalism that you are demonstrating, particularly with respect to Lacolle, and the respect that you are showing to the people who turn up at the border. Personally, I may be naive, but I think that this operation has been done in a very humanitarian way. You talked about this study about what occurred this summer in order to help us learn from this experience and be better prepared in the future. I don't think that this will be the first wave of immigration who have required, who are seeking climate. We've had this in the past. What are the factors that you're focusing on in order to improve, if improvements needed, your operation? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your question. As my colleague from the CBSA was saying, the government is supporting various agencies in order to plan for the future. In concrete terms, I think that one important thing is to look after the lessons learned, specifically so that we can look at location sites in order to see whether we could have a screening center at one place in order to proceed with verifications that we have access to this site to avoid undue transportation. So our role as a government is to provide tools to our colleagues, to our agencies and departments to really look at the arrangements that we can make, pre-position resources, whether it be computers, personnel, as my colleague was saying, so that people will be better prepared than they were this summer. One concern, particularly for those who are listening to the conversation going on outside this House, and my question is for Mr. MacDonald. After the people have crossed the border, how do we follow up on these people? How do we contact them? And since we're dealing with a rather irregular movement, what will the trends be? What will be the trends be when requests are denied or accepted? What what will happen with all these people whose request is going to be rejected? I will let my colleague answer that question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To keep in contact with people is really carried through our operations center, our contact center. When people are intercepted and then processed at the port of entry, we are taking their contact information and so on. So we have the initial information in order to reach out to them. In addition, when people submit all of their forms to continue down the process, we are gathering more and more information with them. That said, we also have been finding in this particular situation in Laval, Quebec, as Mr. Dumas has outlined, the outreach with the community organizations is key. We also have a very healthy relationship with the Canadian Bar Association and all the immigration consultants who work with individuals. So I have many ways to keep in contact with people and encourage them to keep in contact with us.
And with respect to the percentage of those, historically, of all those getting in, how many do you expect may not be admitted?
May not be determined eligible by the IRB. If one were to follow the IRB historical trends, which we can talk about more next Tuesday, I mean, for the Haitian population, it grosso modo is around 50% acceptance rejectance rate, but it varies year by year, sometimes higher, sometimes lower.
Merci. Je vais laisser à Mme Damoff le reste des questions.
Thank you. I'll turn the floor over now to Ms. Damoff, with whom I'm sharing my time.
There are a number of myths about these asylum seekers, so I've got some quick questions first. And my first question is for the RCMP and CBSA. I watched on CBC a report this week where it showed an RCMP officer standing at the border explaining to people the process that would happen. When they cross the border, do they just wander around and join society, or are they arrested?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They are arrested as soon as they're crossed, or as soon as they cross over, and they're advised of that in advance of crossing, so it's really clear to them that they will be arrested.
Okay,
and
and
detained.
The second question I have is, as a member of the Public Safety Committee, we've had a number of dealings with the RCMP and CBSA, and I compliment you on the work you do to keep Canadians safe. Is there a risk to Canadians from these asylum seekers, and is there a risk to Canadian safety with the people who are crossing the border?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of people crossing, obviously their intentions are unknown to us at the time, and that's why we have the processes we do. So we verify their identity, verify status, and do an interview process before ever passing them to CBSA. So we clarify exactly what their intentions are and why they're there.
And I would quickly add to this that once we take custody of these individuals and they go through our process, no one is released if there's even a doubt that there's a security issue or a risk to the Canadian population. All of those cases that present risk are dealt with at the border immediately in their entirety.
Thank you. And my next question is to immigration, and you touched on this in a previous answer, but many people think that these asylum seekers are jumping the queue. Could you answer that, if they are jumping a queue in doing this, or if in fact there are two streams of people who are seeking asylum here?
Those who cross through the regular port of entry or jump the border, they are not jumping a queue because the system is designed to deal with that type of movement. There is no queue jumping for those, and that processing is not in any way connected to the overseas refugee processing system.
Okay, thank you. And we had heard previously about the ebbs and flows in immigration. I'm assuming that there was additional money that was spent in previous years, like 2009, when you would have had to deal with additional asylum seekers, and also that all of your departments are prepared from year to year for these ebbs and flows, because historically they've been happening for over a decade.
Very briefly.
The asylum system right now is currently funded at a baseline of 22,500 claimants a year. That's what we are funded to deal with. Departments individually, under the authorities of the deputy ministers, will have their own contingency and reserve fundings. Plus, we also have a pretty strong ability, certainly within IRCC, to surge and find innovative ways to do work quicker, faster, better, therefore maximizing our output and our dollars that we spend and or save. So it's It's a system that is funded, but we also have ways in order to help ourselves respond to any type of issue should it and when it arises.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Thank you, Ms. Damoff. Ms. Rempel.
Thank you. Numbers have been put forward to committee today by IRCC stating the total number of asylum claimants in various years. Can you provide the number of asylum claimants in those years that were made by people at official points of entry as opposed to unofficial points of entry?
We do have those numbers indeed. We can provide them.
When?
It'll probably come with a package of all the other data, I suspect.
Can you provide that immediately?
We'll do our
right
best.
now?
No, I cannot right now.
So you can't tell us how many asylum claimants were made, let's say, this year by illegal points of entry versus legal points of entry?
I may actually have that, Chair.
Oh, wow. At a briefing on this map, you don't. Oh, that's unfortunate. Of the number of people who have made asylum claims by through unofficial points of entry this year, how many have been ordered deported?
At this point, no such order has been issued because the process is not completed. Except, are we speaking specifically about L'École or in general?
For my question was for the number of all people who have made asylum claims through an illegal point of entry or an unofficial point of entry, how many have been deported?
So I'm aware of cases in British Columbia.
How many?
I believe it's 9, but we will provide those numbers to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you please provide the specific number of cases of people who have made asylum claims at an unofficial point of entry in 2017 that have been connected with criminality or suspected of criminality or have any sort of criminal flag associated with them?
We will provide that, yes.
Do you have that information right now?
I do not have it with me in the details that you're asking, but we will provide that information to you.
When will that be provided?
As soon as possible.
Thank you. Of the number of asylum claims that have been made in 2017, Mr. McDonald, I believe that you said that, to the response to one of my colleagues, that ebbs and flows are associated with visa regimes. In this year, how many asylum claims have been made by Mexican nationals?
Again, I don't have the Mexican number right at hand.
What numbers do you have?
No, I do not have the Mexican number at hand.
Can you please provide that to committee as soon as possible? How many staff within IRCC have been reallocated from different streams of processing to the new processing centers in Montreal? And what streams are they from?
Approximately, I would say 80 staff have been deployed from across Canada to the center at Guy Favreau. In addition to that, we have created back offices in various locations across Canada, and we have approximately a total of 40 staff working, helping the processing at Guy Favreau. We've, as Mr. McDonald pointed out, we have capacity within our resources, to divert individuals from one project to the other. So we took, for example, some people from the Citizenship line, and we've asked them, to go and assist on the project. We've also taken people working on, for example, certain immigration lines, and we've asked them, to participate to the project.
Have the processing times for temporary foreign worker work permits increased in 2017 over 2016?
I don't have this information, but as Mr. McDonald has alluded to, I mean, we have reduced substantially the processing time for refugee claimants, to get work permits over the past few weeks.
Thank you. In the 2017-2018 immigration levels plan, there's a line item that says humanitarian and other. Would that be the line item where asylum claims would be projected?
No, Mr. Chair. The asylum claims would be projected under the protected status persons.
Okay, and how many were projected in that this year?
In 2017, the target is about 15,000.
Okay, and that is just specifically for asylum seekers, or does that also include other streams of refugees as well?
No, that's for the asylum seekers, and then we have a column called resettled refugees.
Okay.
Which is
so this year, just to be clear, and for the record, the government projected 15,000 asylum claimants in the Levels Plan, and last week in New York, the immigration minister is now projecting over 40,000. Is that correct?
Well, just a bit of precision. The protected persons of 15,000, that's the level anticipated of asylum claimants who would actually become protected persons in this year. It doesn't equate to the number of asylum claimants who might show up because the process.
But yet, so do we have that figure of how many asylum claims have been made versus how many have been approved this year?
We certainly have the figures of the number of asylum claimants who come in thus far, which is, I think, 32,000. But it's a staggered pace in terms of when you actually become a protected person. You don't become a protected person until the IRB actually makes the determination that you are a protected person.
Sure. There was one other area that sort of came to my attention that I was curious about. You were talking about expediting healthcare coverage for asylum claims that had been made at a legal port of entry. Is that being undertaken for other streams of refugees as well?
No, the discretion of the minister to do that is exclusively for those who cross through the Lacal situation. For most other asylum claimants across Canada, we are processing them either completely at the port of entry and they're issued their IFH certificate, or we are processing them inland within the 3-day window.
About 30 seconds left.
Great. And just to finish the thought of my colleague, Mr. McGuire, he was asking the RCMP about the number of outstanding deportation cases from asylum claims that have been rejected. Could you speak to those numbers?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I'd have to defer to CBSA for that question.
Sure, sorry.
And again, quickly, we will provide those numbers to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Dubé.
Yeah, Monsieur le Président. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's what's explaining a concentration at certain border crossings. I have a hard time reconciling that with what we see in terms of policies in the United States. So just as a couple of examples, you talked about the Somali diaspora in Minnesota, and we know that in November 2016, Mr. Trump was saying Somali migrants are a disaster for Minnesota. We see increases at Emerson. We know that his interim director of immigration agency in the U.S. was contemplating removing protections for Haitians. We see an increase then in Lacal. So if you're acknowledging that these diasporas are moving, that we're seeing, migrants at specific crossings because of where diasporas are located in the U.S., and that these specific groups of people are being targeted, and we have this on the record in the public, how does the department then say that American policies are not behind this massive movement of migrants at these specific border crossings?
Again, Chair, it comes down to whether or not the individuals actually choose to move. Again, historical patterns of migration movement across Canada from the United States exist. We know that. We have our regional footprints, our regional infrastructure and our regional offices set up, and we're staffed accordingly. We're baseline funded to amounts where typically the system is working. Again, why people are moving and will people move is very much a question that we are engaging with colleagues, not just Americans, but colleagues around the world, to try and figure out factors that push people or factors, quite frankly, that also pull people.
So would, in your opinion, though, the fact that we're seeing these crossings happen at specific areas means that specific groups of people are moving, correct?
Correct. Specific people are moving across specific areas, as well as all kinds of nationalities. All nationalities make asylum into Canada. There just happens to be populations that tend to move more for a variety of world factors, world reasons, war, as I explained, and all kinds.
If I may, I think it's safe to say that both Emerson and Lacal are the two key points over the last 9 to 10 months. And so if we look at the fact that in Manitoba, if I'm not mistaken, the majority were Somali, a group targeted by Mr. Trump, in Minnesota, and if we look at in Quebec, the majority being Haitians, a group that was also targeted, how then again does the department believe that the status quo is reigning? Is there anything specific that leads you to believe that these groups of people are not being targeted, and that's not why the numbers are reflecting? Because the numbers do reflect that those groups of people are the ones that are moving at those specific areas.
So again, Chair, what we're noticing is despite some of the temporary protection lifts that the United States have done, we do see movement of people, but they're not telling us that's necessarily the reasons. Some people are saying those are the reasons. We also don't know what other measures the U.S. might take or any other country might take when they lift temporary protection status, and what people could benefit from. So it's very difficult to try and
So if I may, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So the basis for the department not believing that discriminatory policies are the reason for migration is simply based on what we could call almost exit interviews. Is that correct?
No, not at all.
So what's the basis for not thinking that these groups are moving because they're being targeted by certain policies?
As Mr. McKinnon was explaining, there's a combination of factors. We do regular reviews through our department on country conditions of all countries around the world in terms of refugee movements. We're members of the UNHCR. Working with members of the UNHCR, we work with international organizations to figure out migration patterns and why people are moving and what's pushing people. We have bilateral and multilateral relationships where we talk about these issues, in particular asylum claiming, refugee issues, and so on. So it's a combination of factors that go into, really, we're talking about how do we plan and how do we prepare ourselves for possible future movements that are difficult to predict. You have to take what I'm communicating is we have taken and you have to take a very holistic approach to trying to figure out human behavior in the future.
So that's fair. So if you're the experts, I look at Emerson having a huge increase in asylum seekers, who are, the majority of whom are Somali, a group that was specifically targeted in that area by Mr. Trump as a candidate who's now president. So if that, to me, seems like, as a layperson on these particular issues, see that as a pretty determining factor. So if that for the department is not the key factor, what else is at play?
Well, I think part of the answer to that question, Chair, is it's not just Somalis if we take the Emerson example. In fact, there is a significant number of Djiboutians that are also moving up, and what factors are driving them may in fact be different than the Somali community, yet the volume of movement is in fact quite high. Similarly, Emerson tends to have a very healthy movement, if I can call it that, of people from Ghana and also people from Eritrea. So the mixture of other populations is making it difficult for us to say there's one factor pushing.
And respectfully, is it correct, though, to say that the majority of those who crossed at the Emerson crossing between January and August were of Somali origin?
Correct.
Okay. J'ai une question pour l'agence frontalière.
I have a question for the border agency. I'd like to better understand the role that, can you clarify the role that U.S. Customs is playing and Border Patrol to coordinate efforts that are being undertaken at the border? Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's important to underscore that our U.S. Counterparts are also partners more partners for the RCMP. We do have operational discussions with them on a regular basis. They're very aware of the approach we're taking. This is, we have good cooperation from our point of view. Can you provide greater clarification with respect to the role that these organizations play in defining the movement of people so that you can control what's happening at the border? Can you provide us with greater operational details? No, not in broad terms. They have their mandate and their responsibilities. But what I can tell you is that we have an operational relationship with them with respect to this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, guests. I think for Canadians and particularly
my constituents and British Columbians, integrity of our border and compassion for those that need it are the two outmost issues that are important to them, and balancing those two is what's integral for our country. And I applaud all of you and the answers that you've had. You've been balancing both the integrity of our border as well as being compassionate to those in need. What shocks me more is actually some of my colleagues on the opposing side who refer and ask only questions pertaining to costs, illegal migrants, criminality, deportations, how many removals, how much they cost to our country, how they're a burden. It kind of reminds me of newspaper articles I read over 103 years ago on the Kamagata Maru, which was the same kind of responses a lot of the politicians of similar stripes had said at the time. And I find it appalling that 103 years later, we are still more concerned about criminality, about calling them illegals, and rather than finding out why they're coming and what's needed. To the question I have, there was a question asked if we were to put a port of entry at the place for the largest crossing. Would that just not cause the reason people are going to that particular place is because it's not an official port of entry where they would otherwise be turned back. If we put a port of entry there, would that not just start another road or another site that would be a place where asylum seekers would come? If either the RCMP or CBSA could answer that.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would be our concern, is that it could displace people to other locations, certainly.
Okay. So it wouldn't really solve the situation?
Not from our point of view. We don't believe it would.
And there is an argument, and probably a very valid one, in that there's a loophole in the system between Canada and the U.S., which is in this third-party agreement, which does not specify on port of entry people falling through those cracks. Has governments previous to this one, or has IRCC before tried to negotiate that with the United States to perhaps fill that gap or close that gap?
We're not aware that post the 2002 negotiation that governments tried to renegotiate. We're not aware of that.
There was an article that in 2010, this was the former Minister of Immigration had stated that they had attempted to renegotiate this with the Obama administration, and there was pushback and no result was that. Is that not true?
I've read that same article, but I can't verify that negotiation or that attempt actually happened.
So you're not aware of any previous government trying to negotiate that, particularly the previous government?
I'm personally not aware. I don't know if colleagues are aware, but not aware.
Oh, okay. So it could be just some smokes and mirrors that previous immigration ministers are using to justify that they tried. I would like to find out if we have identified any rings or smuggling rings that might be using human suffering as a way to make money off this. So since thousands are coming over into one particular crossing, have there been cooperation with U.S. law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies to identify if there's any large-scale human smuggling rings that are organizing a mass migration through particular routes through South America from Africa or Haiti, or have we not identified any of these?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can certainly tell you that it is for us a major, significant preoccupation, and that efforts are engaged to ensure that if such networks existed, we could effect a response to these networks. Up until now, there is no evidence of such organized networks. There are people who are benefiting from the situation, but from our perspective, we are not yet aware of human trafficking that would support these movements at this time.
As to integrity, can you, and this is a joint question to the RCMP and CBSA, can you comfortably say to Canadians that each and every migrant person seeking asylum in Canada is getting a thorough background and criminality check, and that they can rest assured and be safe knowing that our law enforcement is doing a great job?
I can certainly tell you that we put in place every factor to mitigate risks as we understand it. And I think it's also important to understand that once people are released for the second part of the process, our security evaluations continue. So they don't stop at the initial interview. If new information were to come to light, action would be taken. It would be factored into the eligibility hearings as well, and it would be subject to a number of different mechanisms to mitigate those risks further down the chain as well.
And do you see any higher rate of criminality from these asylum seekers versus previous patterns?
On this particular point, Mr. Chair, I haven't done the analysis to compare it to prior years, but I can tell you, as my colleague from the RCMP pointed out, the numbers are negligible when it comes to criminality overall at this point.
So very, very low numbers, if any, and those are taken into account and either removed or detained, depending on the severity?
So depending on the scenario, the person would either be handed over to the local police or jurisdiction for proceedings to take place. Depending on the nature of the criminality, it could be viewed by the CBSA as an admissibility question, which would first be cleared up before the process continued for that individual. Necessary actions would be taken at this point, depending on the nature of the offense.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Soraya. Mr. Soraya for a 5-minute.
Thank you to the both chairs, and thank you for coming out for all the witnesses. My question is to Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald, you mentioned that 80 people were taken away from the regular duties that they gone to Montreal. What effect that it made to the regular immigration file, as you know, we get the most calls in our offices looking for this spousal sponsorship, family reunion of sponsorship, and many, many others. 1.5 person full-time working on this delayed. And what was the delayed before, and what is the delayed now after taking these 80 people from their regular jobs?
So the answer to that, Chair, goes back to how we process overall immigration applications within our department. We have different processing networks that process different kinds of applications in different offices in different places under different management. So it's true within our domestic network that Mr. Dumas is the Director General of, we look primarily to his area, and we chose officers with skill sets, and we took efforts to backfill those officers, all in the concept of mitigating as much as possible any impacts to other lines of business. Some lines of business in immigration citizenship will not be touched at all or affected by this because of how we choose our officers to go to Montreal. And we are also now looking at sending officers back from Montreal as we are getting through the work that we need to get through. Overall, the impact has been relatively minor, and we'll only know at the end of the year, because we still have several months of production in which we can adjust and calibrate our output.
Mr. McDonald, what was the delayed before? Do we have any numbers? What was the delayed with taking these people out? How long it take more to process these applications compared to before July?
That would depend on which line of business specifically we are talking about, and as you're aware, sir, we have multiple and different lines of business. It's a very difficult question for me to answer.
In the government definition, what is a refugee?
The refugee definition goes back to various international conventions, and that is the best place to look at those who fear, generally speaking, persecution or prosecution for a variety of reasons.
Some of the people we see on the news on the daily basis on the CBC, CTV, those people coming to Quebec or the various other things, they're driving SUVs, coming iPhones, among other things. in your opinion, are they the refugees or they're just taking advantage of the Canadian generosity?
The social economic status of a person claiming asylum or an overseas refugee is really not part of the equation. It is based on what is the circumstances the individual is facing in terms of persecution, fear, and so on. It is not about how wealthy or economically stable they are.
Going back to the similar question, if some of the people are spending thousands and thousands of dollars, you see it in the news, you read it in the thing on the daily basis, how many of them would be sent back in 60 days or 30 days on the, from the initial interview, or would they be all go through the regular process?
Well, it all depends on what stage of the asylum processing continuum decisions are made around a person's inadmissibility, which may be at the port of entry. Inadmissibility can also be looked at through other partners. And then you go to the eligibility processing, at which case people can be determined not eligible and they have 30 days in which to leave the country. Then there's the IRB hearing, which may make a determination on a person's application, and they may be asked to leave the country if they're not applicable. So, sir, it depends on where in the process, and I think that's the best way to answer.
Mr. Judge, what are the chances the criminal organization, they slip some people in through, knowing that they won't be eligible for the refugee status, they slip through, they don't even, what are the chances somebody slipping through the people, they're not even claiming for the refugee status?
25 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. You want to know if they do not present at the port?
What are the chances people slip, the criminal organization slipping the people through the border? They're not even claiming the refugee status because they know they're not going to get it.
So, did you want to?
If I may, I perhaps could answer that. In terms of human smuggling, which I believe is what you're referring to, we have several programs in place, and we have a terrific partnership internationally with many different areas where we continually investigate human smuggling to prevent and deter human smuggling coming to Canada.
Thank you very much. Ms. Damoff?
I'm going to share my time with Mr. Whalen, and I want to follow up on a question my colleague asked in terms, and actually my Conservative member as well, in terms of who is a refugee. Does Canada take refugees for economic reasons, or are people coming here because they fear for their lives?
Canada does not take refugees for economic reasons. We select immigrants for economic reasons in our levels plan under those economic streams.
But that's a totally different system.
You are correct.
So the people who are crossing illegally, if we're accepting them into Canada, we're only accepting refugees who are coming here because they're afraid for their lives.
We are accepting people to make a claim before the Immigration and Refugee Board where they will present their basis of claim as to why they should be granted refugee protection status by Canada, and then if they are granted status, they have the ability to apply for permanent residence and enter Canada through that stream.
Okay. Thank you. My second question has to do with how you act proactively. When we were in Washington, all members of the committee actually asked the American Border Services, because at the time there was an issue in Manitoba, what do you do to try and prevent this? And you did touch on this in your remarks. But I know historically, because this isn't a new problem, you've worked quite closely with the U.S. identifying where there are issues and actively going to, even to other countries' embassies to try and stem the flow of people through those. We've certainly sent two of my colleagues down into the United States to deal with that. So could you just talk briefly, I only have a short time, about how you do work with the United States over the years to stem these types of asylum seekers?
Mike, did you want to, from your perspective? Or?
I'll start at the very strategic level, and I'll be very, very quick. As I mentioned, we have long-standing relationships in the immigration citizenship world with American colleagues and all colleagues, quite frankly. We belong to bilateral, multilateral organizations. We do deal with foreign governments here in Canada through their diplomatic presence. We have a healthy relationship, and we use that. We also, of course, we have our missions abroad, so we actually have a Canadian footprint that we can engage as we go across. And when it comes to the operational aspect, we have well-established lanes of communication, information sharing, protocols, so on in the operational world, in particular with the United States in terms of immigration overall.
And actually, one of the things
2
they
minutes
said.
left.
Okay. One of the things they said to us is it's not illegal to leave a country. It's only illegal to enter a country. So there's nothing that they can do in terms of stopping people from actually leaving the country. I guess I'd better turn it over to my colleague.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. It was a very enlightening presentation, and I feel much more confident now that the situation is being handled properly and well in accordance with our expectations. In terms of what might happen, Mr. McDonald, you seem to have a lot of expertise and information regarding flow patterns and what might change in the future, and it seems that your organization does monitor that. So 2 questions in that line. The first is, would your models suggest that next year we should see a continuation or a drop-off on the Haitian migration to Canada? And the second point would be, should we suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, how much of an additional impact might we see as a result of that at our normal border crossings in terms of the 11 million undocumented migrants in the U.S.? And if that were to become knowledge, what type of a flow would you anticipate such a change in Canadian policy would cause? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Chair. I mean, in answering both those, honestly, it's extremely difficult to talk about hypotheticals, and I know that's not a great response, but that is the truth. It's impossible to determine people's perceptions versus the realities and all the factors that I have talked about which push and pull people. In terms of next year's numbers, you're right. There are certain decisions that could occur in the United States which may or may not have an impact to next year's volumes. You do have a large number of undocumented workers, as you pointed out, sir, in the United States. How that plays into the factor, it's very extremely difficult to talk about. In terms of a hypothetical of a safe third or no safe third, that's really very hard to predict. But I will say this in closing, is that, again, we have an asylum system established, we have regional, national footprints established in order to handle our #1 goal, which is a managed border asylum system. And that is where we're striving for every day when we go to work, to be frank.
I'm afraid I need to end it there. We don't have time for another round, so I'm going to suggest that brings the end of our time for questioning. I want to thank the witnesses, the officials who are with us today. Very especially thank you. Some of you are relatively new in your positions. Mr. McDonald, welcome to your position. I'd be first time in this position in this committee. It was excellent. And just to remind the members of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, we will continue with our study on Tuesday and Thursday of next week. And now to Mr. McKay.
And to the members of the Public Safety Committee, we passed C-21 last night, so the order of business will be C-21 Tuesday morning, and Thursday the minister will appear first thing Tuesday morning.
We're now going to attempt to synchronize
gavels. Yeah.